Imagine this. Two absolute titans of darkness, legends in their own worlds, actually deciding to team up, putting aside, everything that makes them who they are, to work together. Is that even, conceivable? Today, we're doing a deep dive into Dracula Vlad Catv from Castlevania and the Lich King, Arthas Menethil from Warcraft.
Two heavy hitters, for sure.
Totally. We're digging into their histories, their powers, their weak spots, basically trying to figure out if an alliance, maybe for some kind of greater goal, could actually happen.
Right. Because you, our listener, you've been thinking about this potential dark partnership. So we've gathered all this analysis comparing them on, pretty much everything.
Yeah, our mission today is really to explore that. Do their motivations, powers, even their vulnerabilities line up in any way that makes teamwork plausible, for some big shared objective?
Exactly. And we're going to unpack it systematically. We'll look at where they came from, their origins and transformations, then their arsenals, all that evil power. Then the impact they've had, their legacies of ruin, and crucially, the chinks in their armor. Where are they vulnerable?
Right. That should give us the full picture, hopefully, to see if they could realistically cooperate towards whatever that shared goal might be.
Let's start at the beginning then. Genesis of darkness. Could their origins, maybe some shared trauma, actually build a bridge between them?
It's interesting, right? Because both stories do start with profound loss. Yeah. Dracula, he was originally Matthias Kronfist, a brilliant guy, completely shattered when his first wife, Elisabetha, died.
That loss set him on a dark path.
Yeah, it pushed him to reject humanity, seek power. But it was really the later loss, the execution of his second wife, Lisa. That's what truly ignited his war on humanity. It's like the cycle of grief turning into pure, escalating vengeance.
It's a very personal damnation born from grief, aimed at what he sees as cosmic injustice.
Exactly. Now, how does that compare to Arthas Menethil? His fall feels different.
Very different. Arthas started as this noble prince, right? Trying desperately to save his kingdom from the scourge.
The culling of Stratholme.
Yeah, that was a huge turning point. A horrific choice, driven by desperation. Then he picks up Frostmourne, this cursed, soul-stealing sword.
And that seals his fate, basically.
Pretty much. He becomes a Death Knight, serving the original Lich King, Ner'zhul, and eventually they merge. It feels much more like external manipulation, corruption by dark artifacts and a higher power. Less personal rage, more fallen hero twisted by circumstance.
So, okay, both had huge losses, but why they fell and how they fell seems worlds apart. Dracula's choice feels deliberate, fueled by his own pain. Arthas feels more manipulated, pulled down a path.
Right. Dracula's agency seems much clearer in his fall. Arthas was definitely making choices, terrible ones. But the influence of Ner'zhul and the artifacts, Frostmourne and the Helm of Domination, is undeniable.
Could that shared experience of loss, even if the path afterwards was different, be enough? A foundation for understanding?
It's a thin foundation, I think, because their core philosophies now are so divergent. Dracula is driven by hate, by a desire to inflict suffering as payback. It's personal, it's chaotic.
Yeah.
The Lich King, he's driven by cold, calculated ambition. Absolute dominion. It's not personal vengeance, it's the systematic creation of an undead empire under his thumb.
So one's about emotional retribution, the other's about cold logic and control.
Exactly. And that fundamental difference in what drives them, what they consider success, it makes finding a common greater goal really, really tough. Their end games just don't seem compatible.
Okay, that makes sense. Origins, while tragic for both, don't really point towards partnership. So maybe their powers, let's look at their arsenals of evil. Do their abilities maybe complement each other? Could they work together on that front for this greater goal?
Well, again, we see a big difference in the, let's say, the flavor of their power. Dracula is this whirlwind of abilities. You've got the classic vampire stuff, super strength, speed, regeneration, immortality. Right. But then layered on top is this incredible magical prowess, elemental control fire, maybe even ice sometimes. Dark magic like demonic Megiddo.
Yeah.
Soul stealing with the power of dominance.
Blood Hydra storms, summoning meteors. It's wild.
Totally wild. Yeah. Plus shape-shifting bat, wolf, mist, even that terrifying demon form, teleportation. And of course his control over Castlevania itself, the moving castle. It's all very chaotic and...
Very dramatic, yeah. Almost theatrical power. Okay, so shifting to the Lich King. How does his toolkit compare? Is it as broad?
It's incredibly powerful, but much more focused. The Lich King is the master of death and undeath. Necromancy is his core, commanding the entire scourge.
Billions of undead.
Exactly. Raising powerful death knights, liches, frostworms. His signature magic is frost-based. And then there's Frostmourne.
The soul-stealing sword again.
Right. It doesn't just kill, it consumes and shatters souls. He's also a very strong physical fighter, remember his paladin background. And the Helm of Domination gives him that absolute telepathic control over the Scourge. It's all geared towards domination, control, and spreading undeath.
Okay, so I can kind of see some surface-level synergy, like Dracula's varied magic maybe boosting the Scourge, firestorms and undead hordes.
Potentially. Or the sheer numbers of the Scourge providing an unstoppable army for Dracula. But you hit on something key earlier. Control.
Their styles seem completely different.
Worlds apart. Dracula rules through fear, power, maybe some twisted loyalty from his demonic minions. But they often have their own agendas. The Lich King's control is absolute telepathic. Every single ghoul, every skeleton does exactly what he wills.
How would you even integrate those? Dracula's chaotic court versus the Lich King's hive mind?
It seems like a recipe for disaster, honestly. Inefficiency, conflicting orders, chaos. Dracula's powerful, sometimes independent minions versus a mindless, perfectly controlled horde. The leadership philosophies just clash fundamentally.
And the followers themselves, demons versus undead. Would Dracula's high-ranking demons put up with being controlled by the Lich King's rigid system?
Probably not willingly. And this points to another deep incompatibility, the source of their power. Dracula's is tied to chaos, this primal, unpredictable force.
Right.
The Lich King's power, the domination magic, it ultimately comes from the Shadowlands, specifically the Maw via the Nathrezim and the Rune Carver. It's a different cosmic rulebook entirely.
So would Dracula, this creature of chaos, ever truly partner with someone whose power comes from, well, cosmic order, even if it's a dark order?
It seems unlikely. He wouldn't want to be beholden to that. And conversely, with the Lich King obsessed with total control, tolerate a partner whose power is so wild and whose followers aren't under his direct mental leash.
Yeah, it feels more like they'd see each other's power base as inherently competitive, maybe even something to be consumed or destroyed eventually.
Exactly. So while you might see some cool combos on paper, the fundamental nature of their power, their control, their cosmic origins, it all points away from a stable partnership for any greater goal.
Okay, another point against the Alliance. Let's look at their legacies then, what they've actually done. Do their achievements, their methods, show any overlap that might hint at common ground for a shared objective?
Well, their legacies also show that divergence pretty clearly. Dracula's impact is marked by these cycles, right? Resurrection, terror, eventual defeat by a Belmont or someone similar. Then the cycle repeats.
Like a recurring nightmare for humanity.
Precisely. And he's a master manipulator within that cycle, corrupting people, like Richard Belmont, playing long games. His power displays are often spectacular, catastrophic, moving the castle, the war on Wallachia, demonic Megiddo. But it always feels tied back to his personal vendetta, his pain projected outwards.
Right, targeted, personal, even if the scale is huge. How about the Lich King?
The Lich King operates on a whole different scale of conquest. Think about the scourging of Lord Aran wiping out one of the major human kingdoms, the destruction of Quel'Thalas, the Elf Kingdom, the complete domination of Northrend.
It's systematic destruction, empire building.
Exactly. Cold, calculated, military precision. He builds an undead empire step by step. He crushes powerful foes like Uther, Illidan, Cael'thas, not necessarily out of immediate rage, but as strategic moves to consolidate power and eliminate threats to his plan for total domination.
So if we're trying to find that greater goal they could share, what could it possibly be? Dracula wants revenge, wants humanity to suffer for his loss. The Lich King wants everything under his undead control.
They just don't seem compatible.
Yeah.
Dracula's chaotic emotional crusade versus the Lich King's methodical, ordered, albeit horrifyingly undead vision for the world. How do you merge those?
Yeah, Dracula's manipulations often seem aimed at just perpetuating his own cycle, ensuring he comes back. The Lich King's strategies are all about expansion, crushing resistance, building his power base relentlessly.
It's really hard to picture a greater goal that satisfies both. Dracula's personal focus seems too narrow, in a way, even with its huge scale. And the Lich King's desire for absolute control doesn't leave room for an equal partner.
It feels like their methods, their entire modus operandi, are just fundamentally different. One is cyclical rage, the other is relentless linear conquest.
Could a massive common threat force a temporary truce? Maybe, out of pure necessity. But a real lasting alliance for a unified, greater goal. Based on their legacies, it seems incredibly doubtful. Their ambitions are just set up to clash, not merge.
Right. Okay, so legacies also suggest no dice on the alliance. But maybe. Maybe their weaknesses. Could shared vulnerabilities create some kind of bond or at least a reason to cooperate? Let's look at the chinks in their armor.
Interesting angle. But again, we see key differences. Dracula's weaknesses are kind of a mix. You have the classic vampire stuff. Vampire killer whip is a big one. Holy artifacts, holy magic. Though how effective these are can vary a bit in the lore.
Sunlight, too, sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah, it's inconsistent. But arguably his biggest vulnerability, the one that gets exploited most often, is his lingering humanity. His love for Lisa, his complicated feelings for Alucard, those emotional ties.
That's a very personal weakness, tied to his past, the man he was. What about the Lich King?
His are much more tied to the sources of his power. He definitely has an aversion to the holy light, especially when it's wielded powerfully or in holy ground.
Makes sense.
And of course, Frostmourne. Its destruction was his ultimate undoing, releasing all those trapped souls.
Right, that was critical.
And while there were maybe hints of Arthur's spirit fighting inside, that wasn't really a weakness enemies could reliably exploit tactically. His biggest ongoing vulnerability is probably his dependence on the Helm of Domination to control the Scourge. Lose the helm.
Use the army. Okay. So, artifact-dependent weaknesses versus more personal, emotional ones for Dracula.
Pretty much. Now, could they protect each other's weaknesses in an alliance? Maybe some limited ways? Could Dracula's magic shield the Lich King from the light? Possibly. Could the Scourge just overwhelm anyone trying to get close to Dracula with the vampire killer? Maybe.
But it could also backfire.
Yeah, absolutely. Dracula's emotional vulnerability. The Lich King would likely see that as a massive liability, something he might even exploit.
And the Lich King relying on artifacts. Dracula, with his chaotic magic and history of manipulation, might see that as an opportunity too. Or an enemy could target both weaknesses at once.
Imagine, yeah. A big holy attack weakens the Lich King, and right then, someone reminds Dracula of Lisa, sending him into a vulnerable rage. An alliance could create new ways for them to be vulnerable.
It also brings up the trust issue, or like the total lack of it.
Exactly. These are two incredibly powerful, inherently selfish beings. Would Dracula ever trust the Lich King to protect his emotional core? Would the Lich King trust Dracula not to mess with the Helm or Frostmourne?
Given Dracula's history of betrayal and the Lich King's literal philosophy of domination and backstabbing, no way.
The lack of trust seems like an absolute deal-breaker. Any alliance built on mutual protection would be incredibly fragile, probably doomed to fail from within.
Okay. Definitely seems like weaknesses don't help the alliance case either. So, given all this, let's just speculate for fun. What if they did clash? One-on-one.
Oh, that would be a fight to see. Dracula brings speed, teleportation, shape-shifting, that massive magical arsenal. Yeah. Incredible versatility and mobility.
Right. He can attack from anywhere, any form.
The Lich King brings Frostmourne immense physical resilience from his armor, powerful frost magic that can control the battlefield, and serious combat skill.
It feels like the key is Frostmourne versus Dracula's soul manipulation, right? The power of dominance.
Absolutely critical. Can Frostmourne just eat Dracula's ancient chaos-infused soul?
Hmm?
Or could Dracula somehow resist, or maybe even affect the souls within Frostmourne? That interaction is key.
I feel like Dracula's chaotic nature and magic might give him an edge in avoiding that direct soul steal. If he can stay mobile, use his magic, he could potentially overwhelm the Lich King's defenses, maybe.
It's debatable. But what about their armies? Castlevania's forces versus the Scourge.
Now that feels different. Dracula has powerful demons, night creatures, maybe some strong lieutenants, and Castlevania itself is a weapon.
True. But the Lich King has the Scourge. Near infinite numbers, completely fearless, perfectly controlled, and
he can raise the dead, including Dracula's fallen forces.
Exactly. In a long war of attrition, that ability to constantly replenish and grow his army by reanimating his enemies is terrifying. Icecrown Citadel versus Castlevania is also an interesting fortress fight.
It just feels like the sheer, relentless tide of the Scourge, combined with the reanimation. Eventually, they likely overwhelm Dracula's more elite but finite forces. Scale and attrition seem to favor the Lich King there.
I tend to agree. The Scourge's nature is just built for that kind of grinding warfare.
Okay, so bringing it all back home, the original question you, our listener, were pondering. Can Dracula and the Lich King form a genuine, lasting alliance for a greater goal?
Based on everything we've looked at, origins, motivations, powers, legacies, weaknesses, inherent natures, the answer really seems like a solid no.
Yeah. Their ambitions are too individualistic, too focused on absolute power for themselves. Their methods, their power sources, their leadership styles, they just fundamentally clash.
Deep-seated distrust is baked into their very beings. Any alliance would likely be temporary, tactical, and probably end in a spectacular betrayal.
A brief truce against a god-level common enemy, maybe out of pure desperation, but a real alliance, sharing power, working towards a common vision.
What vision could they possibly share? Utter annihilation of all life. Maybe, but even then, they'd fight over how to do it and who gets to be in charge at the end.
Right. Dracula's chaotic vengeance versus the Lich King's cold, ordered undeath. They seem destined to be opposing forces, not partners.
Exactly. Solitary icons of darkness pursuing their own terrifying goals.
So after all that, what do you think? Could Dracula's deep-seated grief and the Lich King's icy ambition ever find common ground for some greater goal? Or are they just fundamentally incompatible forces?
Think about what drives them. Are those forces that could ever truly collaborate? Or are they just inherently self-serving, maybe even self-destructive when put together?
Keep exploring these amazing characters and their worlds, and let us know what other unlikely alliances in fiction intrigue you. We'd love to hear your thoughts.